Greetings, my children. I hope you are all doing well and listening to Keegan and memorizing. I know it's kind of hard because this is Romans. It's a little tough, but you know how quizzing works. You just have to memorize it, and you won't understand it at first all the time. But I promise you, if you persevere, you guys know what perseverance produces, right? Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope will not put you to shame. So if you persevere, if you study this stuff out, if you memorize, I promise you, you will not regret it because this word is alive and active. But that being said, I do understand that it's a lot easier to memorize when you understand what you're reading. So that is what I'm here to help you with today. So, the good news is you can understand Romans. I promise. Because think about it. Paul wrote this letter to the Romans, and when they got it and they read it, do you think they had, their big old Bible dictionary right here and their book of theology and, tons of other commentaries, and then they read it? No. The letter was written to them, and they understood it, because Paul knew who they were, and they could know what he was talking about. The reason we don't really understand it is because it wasn't written to us. This book, it's not called the Epistle to the Harrisburg Quiz Team, unfortunately. We're kind of listening in on half of a phone conversation. So we need to understand who these people were so that we can understand what Paul's trying to say to them. And so, I will tell you a story about who the Romans were. Once upon a time, there was an emperor, and his name was Claudius. And Claudius has a really interesting story about how he became emperor. And I don't have time to tell it to you today, but it includes conspiracy theories and assassins and all sorts of scandalous things. So you'll have to ask me about it sometime. But anyways, what you need to know is that in Rome, there was sort of a big disagreement between the Jewish people who believed in Jesus and the Jewish people who didn't believe in Jesus. And since the Jewish people were very good at making money, some of them still are today, this was kind of holding up the whole economy of Rome. And so Claudius was thinking to himself, how am I going to solve this problem? My whole economy is just being held up. What should I do? And then he had a brilliant idea, and he said, I know. I'll just kick them all out. So he banished all the Jews from Rome. And so this is why next year, when you read Acts in the beginning of chapter 18, you'll see Priscilla and Aquila who get kicked out of Rome, and that's when they meet Paul, because they've been banished from Rome, and they meet Paul in Greece, in Corinth. The interesting thing about Romans is that the Church of Rome, it wasn't actually started by Paul. In fact, Paul has never met these people when he writes to them. And that's why in the beginning he talks about, I've heard such great things about you guys and about your faith. And they obviously know who he is. He's pretty famous. But he hasn't actually been able to get there yet. He hasn't gotten to Rome yet to meet these people. And so he just writes to them about what he's heard. So the Church of Rome was actually started by Jewish people who believed in Jesus, and they started a church, and they reached out to some Gentiles, and the Gentiles heard about Jesus, and they came and they joined the Jewish church, and it grew, and they learned about Jesus. But now, all of a sudden, these Jews are gone. These Jews are kicked out. And so the Gentiles are left there by themselves. They're like, guys, they have to figure out how to do this all on their own. It's like if all of a sudden all of the coaches on the Harrisburg team got kicked out of Pennsylvania. They all came to Switzerland to visit me. And so you guys are left there all by yourself to figure out how to run quizzing. It's a frightening thought, I know. But just let's think it through. I asked Levi for his opinion about what would happen. Who would step up? Who would be in charge? And Levi said that he would. And so, like I said, I pray that this will never happen. It's a frightening thought. But you guys you'd have to figure this out by yourselves, and like just think about how this would work. You'd have to. Who's gonna be in charge of making T-shirts? I don't know. Let's pick Chloe. And so Levi, I guess he took over. He's the new Keegan. He'll write the questions, and Aaliyah, she'll yell at people when they don't memorize. And who's gonna lead? Who's gonna lead Bible study? Well, how about Josh and Alyssa? They can do it. And so at first, you guys aren't that great at this. This is brand new to you. There's some arguments, but eventually you figure this out after a couple years, and you're getting good at this. You're beating Crossroads in E-Town. Maybe. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves. But you're doing good. And so that's what happened to this church in Rome. The Gentiles, they said, well, you can preach, and how about you lead worship, and you can lead Sunday school. And at first they weren't that great at it, but eventually, they figured it out. They were doing okay. And so then, one day, our good old friend Claudia, the emperor, he dies. And so all of the laws he made die with him, including the one that got rid of the Jews. And so, what do you know? The Jews get to come back. Happy day, happy day. The coaches have come back from Switzerland, and they come back to you guys. And this is what happened. So the Jews came back to Rome. And so in your scenario, the coaches come back. I'm back. Marcus is back. Keegan's back. And we come to Sunday school, and Josh was in charge of leading the Bible study for that Sunday. And so we sit there and we listen to Josh, and he gives a nice Bible study. He's gotten pretty good at that. And so we say, oh, good job, Josh. Very nice, very nice. But Marcus will teach next Sunday. And, Keegan walks in and he sees Levi sitting in his chair behind the quiz box. And you guys can imagine what happens there. And so there's a little tension about who's actually better at leading, and there's going to be tension about who's going to be in charge, who's right, who's wrong, who's better. And that's what happened in the church here. The Jews come back and they hear the nice sermon and they say, oh, good job, you guys are doing so great. But we'll teach next Sunday. And then there's a big meal after church, and the Gentiles make nice food for the Jews, and they give the Jews this wonderful food, and the Jews sort of look at the meat and they pick at it a little with their fork and they say, what is this? And the Gentiles say, oh, that it's pork. Jews don't eat pork. Jews do not eat pork. That is unclean. And so there's all this tension. They're all like, they just can't seem to get along. There's so many cultural differences and so much pride. And what we can see actually in chapter 16, which is probably the chapter you know as the boring chapter, and it's full of names. But the thing is, those names are actually very important, because from those names you can figure out where those people are from, like whether they're a Jew or whether they're a Gentile. It's like today, if I said, Chiquea and Megan or Julio, like you could tell sort of what those people's ethnicities are. And so from chapter 16, we can see that the Gentiles are just meeting together with the Gentiles. There's like 5 different churches. There's the Gentiles with the Gentiles. The Jews are meeting with the Jews. The slaves are meeting with the slaves. And, it's like the church kids, the quizzers are coming on Sunday mornings, and the city kids are coming on Wednesday night. And there's no unity. It's not good. And so this is what's happening in the church. This is what Paul hears about. And so Paul writes them this letter. And he starts out the letter by saying, you're all sinners. It's a real charming way to start a letter. I should start all my letters that way. You're all sinners. He starts in chapter 1, and he just talks about like the Gentile sin. All these different sins that Gentiles do. And you can just picture this letter being read in the Roman church, and the Jews are sitting there listening to the Gentile sins, and they're like, I knew I was better. But then Paul looks right at them in chapter 2, and he says, "You, therefore, have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else. For at whatever point you judge another, you are condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same thing." Ouch. Whew. And so these Jews, these Jews were like quizzers. They memorized the first 5 books of the Bible, and they went to church every Sunday. They went to camp every summer. They knew the Bible pretty well. At least they knew way more about what it means to be a Christian than those kids who come on Wednesday nights. They don't even know the difference between like Moses and Noah. These Jews, they know what they're talking. They're the good ones. But Paul says, hey, guess what? You're all sinners. All of you. You church kids and you city kids. You're all sinners. And Jesus cared enough about all of you to die for you. So don't you dare judge each other, because Jesus died for you. And so, think about this. This, God is so huge. God is so big. Just imagine this whole room is like how big God is, and that's how big His grace is. And this is how big you are. I don't know if you can see that, but you're that little speck right there. And this is me. And this is that kid on Wednesday nights who just is so, who just drives you crazy. And this is Pastor Woody. And this is somebody in Africa. And look, you're all just little specks. You're all just little specks in God's huge, huge mercy. And the minute that you start thinking that you are better than that other little speck, you need an attitude adjustment. You need to be transformed. You need your mind renewed. You need to start thinking straight. And you need to start honoring other people above yourself. And this is what Paul writes about from chapter 12 to the end. He says, I've told you about how amazing God's grace is for you that you didn't deserve. And so now this is how you need to start living. and it's going to be hard. Sometimes it's so frustrating. Sometimes you feel like Paul does in the end of chapter 7. He says, I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. What a wretched man I am. And I understand that. I feel pretty ratchet sometimes. I feel pretty, oh God, I want, Father, I want to be kind to the people around me, and I know that that's the right thing to do. I know that I need to be reaching out to these people who are different from me, but I just keep screwing it up, and so that's what chapter 7, the end of chapter 7 is about. It's just I keep failing. Oh, wretched man that I am. What a wretched man I am. But the answer to that struggle that we have is actually in the next chapter. It's in chapter 8. And the first thing that Paul writes about in chapter 8 is that God says, there's no condemnation. I forgive you. It's okay. I knew you were a sinner 2,000 years ago when I decided to let my son die for you. It's okay. There's no condemnation. And then the next thing he says is, that same power that rose Jesus from the dead, I'm giving it to you. That's what the Holy Spirit is. The Holy Spirit is the power that raised Jesus from the dead, and I'm giving it to you. And the Holy Spirit, is the one who can change your youth group, who can renew your mind, who can transform your life. And so pray that you can be full of Him, and He He will give you the power to fight for the unity of our youth group. You have to surrender your body to as a living sacrifice. That's what chapter 12 says. Surrender your body as a living sacrifice. That's what worship is. Worship isn't just singing and raising your hand. Worship is surrendering your life as a living sacrifice and living like chapter 12. And so, good luck with that. The Holy Spirit will give you the power to do that. He's probably talking to you right now. Maybe in your heart, you know what you must do for the sake of our youth group, for the sake of God's youth group, for the sake of those kids that He loves so much. And so, I'll be praying for you guys. I know you can do it. I know that you see this problem, and I know that you know what to do. And so I want you to be praying about this. And every time you read Romans and you see how Paul is just pleading with them, please be unified. I want you to be praying that the Holy Spirit will give you the power to reach out to the kids who are different from you. I myself am convinced, my brothers and sisters, that you are full of goodness, filled with knowledge, and competent to instruct one another and to hold each other accountable about this unity. And so, greet one another with a holy kiss. And actually, don't greet each other with a holy kiss, please. Cooties are real, and we should all live in terror of them. Anyways, I'll see you next month. And I love you all. I'm praying for you. Goodbye.